Ready to get in the Word? All right. Well, this morning, the message is entitled Identity Theft. Identity theft. Y'all have heard a little bit about that, I'm sure, in other contexts. Specifically, we're talking about our identity. My bank has given me probably 2 or 3 new debit cards over the last year and a half, 2 years. It almost has become frustrating because you get it all figured out and you have all of your bills tied to that one number, and then they'll send you a new card and they'll say, by this date, this will no longer be effective. We're doing this because there's a chance that somebody's messing with your identity, or there's been a breach, or there's been something going on. So I'm thankful that they're protecting my account, but man, it can be frustrating. And right now in this day, there's so much identity theft, and it's such an issue that banks are having to protect. And they're having to send out new debit cards on a regular basis to make sure that nobody steals your money or steals mine. So identity theft is real. But can I tell you, the enemy wants to rob you of your identity as well. And this is the crazy thing, is he can't actually take away who you are. He can't rob you of who you really are, but he can rob you of who you think you are. Chew on this for a second. So he can't really take away who you are. He can just lie to you so that you don't realize who you are. So he can take away from your future by stealing your identity today. I mean, he can't really change who you are, but he can change who you think you are. And that changes the outcome, doesn't it? Doesn't it? I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning. It's early for y'all. We're going to do this together. You ready? All right, so there's a number of passages that I want us to look at today. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 3 and 4. So if you want to write that down, Matthew chapter 3 and 4. I'll write it up here. Matthew 3 and 4. We'll also look at Matthew chapter 27, and then we'll go to Nehemiah chapter 6. We'll break down the verses. There's a number of verses that we're going to look at when we go through this. So let's start with Matthew chapter 3. I want to look at the baptism of Jesus. I might have to get my glasses, y'all. Here we go. Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. When Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water. And behold, the heavens were opened to him. And he saw the Spirit, it says he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." What is Jesus' identity in this particular passage? Somebody yell it out. It's the Son, right? Not just Son, but this is my beloved Son, and I'm going to go a little further, in whom I am well pleased. I am pleased in this Son. Now go to chapter 4. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. By the way, in the original context, there wouldn't have been a number 4 right there. This passage would have flowed right into the next. There wouldn't have been a stop, abbreviation, nothing. We would have continued on. So then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God." Do you see it? Woo! By the way, that's how the enemy works. He comes in. God has already said, this is who you are. And he comes in and says, if you really are. Oh, you think that you're a preacher? You think you're a pastor? By the way, this is my conversation in my head, so stay out of it, okay? But this is the conversation that goes on in Eric's head is, oh, if you're a preacher then, and sometimes people, listen, I don't think they have ill will all the time. Sometimes they don't have ill will. Sometimes they'll say, well, if you're a pastor, and then they'll tell me what a pastor is supposed to do. Right? I had a conversation with a guy one time, and he was basically going down the list of all the pastors and preachers and churches that he had gone to and how everything that they did was not supposed to the way it's supposed to be. And I finally looked at him and I said, sounds like you need to start a church. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like if you really feel that convicted about this, then start a church. Pastor, lead in that way. But how many times they do? The enemy, listen, he will take your identity and he'll diss it. Oh, some of you young adults, y'all don't know what that means. I'm sorry. It's a word that we used in the 80s. Maybe in the 90s. I don't know. Was it in the 90s? Don't you go dissing me. Have you ever heard that before? I'm just messing with you because you always give me a hard time. All right? I want y'all to remember this. Don't let the enemy diss your identity. Don't let the enemy diss your identity. 3 things. Discourage, distort, or distract. Don't let him do it. He will take your identity, even knowing what your identity is, and he'll begin to twist it and distort it. And he'll distract you from it. He'll do anything he can to get you off base. He knows God's doing something in you. He's probably even heard the things that God has said about you, and he'll come right at that. I think one of the perfect examples of how you can have something great in your life and a talent or a gifting in your life, and the enemy will use it against you, and it totally changes the course of your life, is some of those kids that are in school that are super, super smart. By the way, I wasn't that kid, so this isn't my story. It's somebody else's. Super, super smart. And all the other kids begin to give them a hard time about being smart. And they dumb down their intelligence to fit in. That's exactly what the enemy wants. He wants to, listen, if he can dish your identity, he can change your destiny. If he can diss your identity, he can change your destiny. And so he comes to, the temptation to Jesus, he comes to him and he says, if you really are the Son of God. Now we know that he is because just shortly before this, the Father spoke from heaven and said, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. Now if you are truly the Son of God, then turn this stone into bread. Hey, listen, devil, I don't take my orders from you. I don't take my marching orders from you. Let me tell you what the Word says, because he goes back to the whole thing of speaking truth into the situation. Let me tell you what the Word says. Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. You better step back. I know who I am. He doesn't do it once, he does it twice. He goes on to say in verse 6, and he said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. If you are the Son of God, he didn't try it once, he tried it twice. Can I tell you, he tried it more than that. Turn to Matthew chapter 27, and this will blow your mind. And if it doesn't, sorry, it blew my mind. If you look at the crucifixion, the enemy throws Jesus' identity in his face over and over and over and over again. Why? Because he wants to discourage him, he wants to distort the truth, and he wants to distract him from the destiny that God's called him to. So he's doing everything he can to get him off course. Look at this. If you go to Matthew 27:27, then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters. They gathered the whole battalion before him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, twisting together a crown of thorns. They put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand. They're mocking him. Now watch this. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. He is the King of the Jews. But they used his identity against him. Why? Because they wanted to discourage him, distort the truth, and they wanted to distract him from his destiny. I love, Caleb and I had a conversation about this week through text. And I love what he was saying. He was saying, but it also encourages me because I know that Jesus was tempted in every way, yet was without sin. That the very thing that the enemy uses against us is something he used against our Savior. And that's why he can sympathize with us in every way. And that's why we can come boldly into the throne of grace and we can find grace and mercy in our time of need because Jesus endured the same thing we endure when it comes to identity. But I want you to know something. Jesus never had a true identity crisis. He knew who he was. I am the bread of life. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the vine. You are the branches. I know who I am. Before Abraham was, I am. He knew who he was. But the enemy also knew who he was, and he tried to use it against him. You know, it's that one girl that has that talent that gets up on the stage and uses her voice to sing amazing things, and the other girls come up and say, oh, you're just showy. Oh, you're just showing off. You're just showing off. And then what ends up happening is it dumbs down once again the talent that people have. The enemy does that all the time. And he tries to pull you back from the gifts that God's given you. He tries to pull you back from the talents that God's given you. Listen, use those gifts all to the glory of God and don't worry about what anybody else says. I've even had it in my own life where I allowed myself to get it twisted backwards. I had somebody who, when I was younger, bragged on me saying, he was one of my brother's friends. He said, Eric's not like all the other ones. He doesn't cuss and use all that language. And I thought I had to show him that I could. My mouth got so nasty, y'all. I'm telling you. The enemy uses even compliments. You know what I'm saying? We allow that to happen in our identities. And yet, can I tell you, that was one of the hardest things for me to quit when I was set free. And when God saved me, one of the hardest things was changing my mouth. You want to know why? Because it's out of your heart that the mouth speaks. I didn't have a mouth problem. By the way, if you got a language problem, it's not your mouth that's the issue, it's your heart. I didn't say it, God said it. And I had a major heart issue, and he had to do some heart work to change that. But I remember that conversation all the way back then where I allowed the enemy to distort something. And I was like, well, I'll show him. Really? Couldn't even accept a compliment because our identity is always under attack. It's always. Why do you think I talk about identity so much? Because I don't have anything else to talk about? Maybe. No. Because as a teacher of the gospel, as a teacher of the Word of God, I know that one of our biggest struggles is figuring out who we are. And when we can figure out whose we are and who we are, it changes the course of our life. Those little battles that we have going on in our mind, did anybody have those this week? You know, the lies that the enemy spits at you. Did you have any of that going on? Your emotions, they just don't seem to align with what the truth is, so you begin to believe the emotions instead of believing the truth. It happens to us on a day-to-day basis. That's why it's so important that we know who we are and whose we are. It's foundational. That's why we keep talking about it. And listen, the enemy's continuing to spit at Jesus his own identity. He's mocking his identity. Verse 30, it says, and they spit on him, and they took the reed, and they struck him on the head. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, and they put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross, and when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink. By the way, that's a mockery too. Mixed with gall, which is a bitter herb, can even be poisonous if you take too much in. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. They sat down and kept watch over him there. Over his head, they put the charge against him. The charge against him was his identity. Think about that. Over his head, they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right, one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself." Here you go. If you are, come on, do you see it? If you are the Son of God, it's almost like all the demons in hell are speaking through him or through these people. The enemy's speaking again. He said, if you really are the Son of God, come down from the cross. So also the chief priests with the scribes and the elders mocked him, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross. Let him come down from the cross. Turn to somebody and say, I'm not coming down. You're going to know why in a second, but just trust me on this. Turn to somebody and say, I'm not coming down. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. Then we'll believe in him. We'll believe in him if he'll come down from the cross. We'll believe in him if he'll stop moving in the direction of his destiny. We'll believe in him if he'll back down from using his gifts and his talents and his abilities. We'll believe in him if he'll stop being what he is. We'll believe in him then. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God. It says that the robbers also reviled him. If you look at the full story in the other passage in Luke, it actually says one of them mocked and the other one said, chill out. This actually reminds me of the story of Nehemiah. So I want us to look at that real quick. Reminds me of the story of Nehemiah. When I heard, he says, come down from the cross, I thought about Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 14, it actually says that he was appointed to be the governor. Listen, he was appointed, his identity, he was the governor. That's who he was. Verse 18, it actually said, verse 14 and 18 both say he didn't even take the food that was allowed for the governor. Didn't take it, right? And then in Nehemiah 6:6, the people that were mocking Nehemiah, see, Nehemiah is rebuilding Jerusalem. It was totally destroyed. So he's coming and he's rebuilding the wall. He's rebuilding the security system around the place. And check this out. In verse 6, it says, In it was written, this letter that was sent to him, it says, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. It says, according to these reports, you wish to become their king. He never said he wanted to become their king, but he was their governor. He was already given that title of governor. Isn't it interesting that Jesus was the king and they still mocked him for what he was? He was the governor, didn't even take, and then how they mock him? You want to be the king. But this is the line that I want you to take from Nehemiah. Are y'all ready? Are you ready? All right. I want you to take Nehemiah 6:3, and I want you to chew on this for a second. And I sent messengers to them, these mockers, these people that are giving us a hard time. And he says, I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Get this. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? Look at me. Quit coming down from the work that God's given you to give an answer to somebody who doesn't even care. Quit coming down from the work that God's given you to try to defend yourself against somebody who doesn't care. They don't want you to finish the work. Let the jealousy be jealousy. Let the envy be envy. But quit stopping the work you're doing to respond to them. And stay focused on the work that you have in front of you. Jesus was being mocked from the cross, and he said, without saying a word, he said the exact same thing. I will not come down because I'm doing a great work. Whew. Y'all, I'm not coming down from this cross because the Father put me here. If you go all the way back to when he was just a 12-year-old boy, he's preaching in the temple. He's teaching the teachers in the temple, and they were confused. They're like, where'd this young kid learn all this stuff? His parents, who had lost him for 3 days, you thought we were bad parents, right? 3 days, y'all. 3 days. It's a cultural thing, all right? I can explain that later, but 3 days, we've been looking for you. And he said, did you not know I'd be in my Father's house? Did you not know I'd be doing my Father's business? Come on. I'm doing that work. And he continued that work until his last words. And you know what he said? He said, it is finished. Are y'all having fun yet? He said, I will not come down from this cross because the work that I'm doing is too great. Now, you can say all you want about my identity. You got it all figured out, don't you? You know what a pastor's supposed to do. You know what a preacher's supposed to do. You know what a parent is supposed to do. Well, if you're a good parent, then you should. Listen, don't back down from what God's called you to do because somebody else has their own insecurities. Stay focused on who you are and whose you are. Don't let the enemy diss your identity. Don't let him change your destiny. Finish it and go through the end. Now check this out. Watch this play out. We're going to go a little bit further in that Matthew passage. So flip back over if you're not there. Go back over to Matthew 27. And let's watch how this unfolds. Verse 45, now from the 6th hour. We're going to wrap this up, okay? Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, or some will say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said he's calling Elijah. Listen, he's saying Eli. He's given the short name of Elijah. They didn't even know who God was. You see what I'm saying? He's calling out to God. He's not calling out to some prophet. He's talking to the God of the prophets. It says, and one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. Other passages will tell you what he said. He said, it is finished. And he gave up his ghost. He gave up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe, and they said, do you see it? Truly, this was the Son of God. Finish the work. Finish the work, and your identity will shine. Who you are will speak for itself. You don't owe anybody any explanation of who you are. I am who the great I am says I am. Nothing more, nothing less. Well, who does he say that I am? I have 4 identity statements that are all based on Scripture. You need to get one. You need to get some for yourself. You need to grab Scriptures and let them be the truth over your life. My first one is I'm created by him, like him, and for him. The second is I'm chosen, but must choose. The third is I'm called on purpose for a purpose. And the fourth is I'm best in community with other believers. That's who I am. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter the labels that my past tried to put on me. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It doesn't matter what I see in the mirror in the morning and the evening or middle of the day. The only thing that matters is what he says. What he says is who I am. And if you're struggling to figure out who you are, get into his presence. Because it's in his presence that we figure out who we really are. Well, how do I get in his presence? Get in his word. This is truth. And the truth will set you free. Anybody want to know who you are? It's right here.